Babblefish says in his comment to me, the left wants martyrs and is willing to jump to conclusions to get them. Well, you're right. That happens. And you're also wrong. Yes, Black Lives Matter was founded on the basis of some very serious media manipulation. And there were lies told by blacks and whites to feed a narrative that was decided on early in the case before all the facts could be known. And that narrative was just fed throughout that Trayvon Martin case. Now, Babblefish goes on to say, now let me say that I am willing to stipulate that the police officers who shot Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, these more recent shootings, may have been racist, drunk, poorly trained, on drugs, neo-Nazis, whatever. The key word here is may. I don't know all of the facts and neither do you. We only know what has been shown to us. The officers may ultimately be found to be guilty, but it is also possible that there may be relevant facts that are mitigating. It is your rush to judgment that is so disturbing. At 11:35, you call these unwarranted, unjustified killings by police officers. In doing so, you are allowing yourself to be part of a larger problem. This is him talking to me. Remember that the rush to judgment in Ferguson and Baltimore led to riots, widespread destruction, and a dramatic increase in crime as the police became afraid to engage the criminals. That is, by the way, not a conclusion I support. That the police became afraid to engage the criminals. And there's more on that later. The lies that were used to supposedly improve the lot of black citizens actually made their lives far more dangerous and reduced their quality of life. This fits in with the progressives' ultimate agenda just fine. The recent assassination of 5 Dallas police officers is not a surprise, given the hatred that has been ginned up by the left toward the police. It is dismaying and disturbing to see you jumping on that bandwagon. As much as you say you respect the police, you are not against the police, etc. The overall tone of this video fits in with the Black Lives Matter agenda, which is inherently divisive, destructive, and now we see deadly. All right. Again, Babblefish, you're right and you're wrong. You criticize me for rushing to judgment, and you have a point there. And I've clearly stated that was a valid point. Yeah, the lies and the false representations and false conclusions that the media forwards definitely are made in an effort to try to make racial discrimination an issue and make it forefront in the media. And those lies and distortions do ultimately harm the cause, okay? But not for the reasons you have laid out. And then, of course, you're saying not for the reasons I think. It's kind of circular. Not only do some of these distortions cause people to overreact violently, because they do. I grant you that. When the media distorts these stories, when they make them out to be something they're not, that does incite people to take action, like the killing of the 5 Dallas police officers, which they definitely should not be taking. There's never an excuse for that. But reversely, one of the other consequences of that is it gives people like you, Babblefish, reason to think that there's no problem at all and that the left is just making it all up. And then you excuse and dismiss the entire problem. So you're going to another extreme of, well, there's no problem at all because of these lies and distortions. No, that's not actually the case. The Black Lives Matter agenda, as you call it, is actually to talk about unequal race relations in the United States. To define the entire movement, to define any entire movement by its worst case members. Well, do we define all Christians by the Westboro Baptists? I hope not, because that would be just as wrong. Do we say that Anita Sarkeesian speaks for all feminists? I sure as hell hope not, because that would be wrong. So it's cherry picking your facts to serve your agenda or your narrative, and it disturbs me that you don't see what you're doing. Okay. So, in that sense, by denying that there is any problem with race relations in this country, you yourself are contributing to what you are accusing Black Lives Matter of doing, which is being inherently divisive, destructive, and reaching a deadly irrational conclusion. To say there's no problem at all is just as wrong as saying that all this violence and horribleness that Black Lives Matter is engaged in, or members of Black Lives Matter is engaged in, that's wrong. Well, so is this. The truth is in the middle. Okay. And if you think, by the way, that I'm attacking you right now, I'm not. Okay? I'm trying to point out that there are multiple sides to a complex and very layered problem. And this problem does exist in the United States. It is not all just made up. It is not just people on the left inciting violence and divisiveness and hatred because they don't have anything better to do. That's not what's going on, okay? And I've given you 2 cases out of 3 that show that. Okay, so Babelfish goes on. He says here, at about 26:10 in our last podcast, me, say, the horrible truth right now, especially if you are a black man or black person, you are not necessarily assured of fair and equal treatment by the police. I said that. And he says, the fact is that you are correct, but not in the way you intended. Black citizens are now more at risk, are being murdered, robbed, intimidated at higher rates, precisely because the police are afraid to police, because of the efforts of the left to demonize the police every time they deal with the violence in the inner city. Would you want to live in Chicago or Baltimore? Why not? Black on black crime is rampant in our inner cities. You can't attack the police and expect them to put themselves at risk of being prosecuted every time they have to deal with a potentially violent offender. Okay, again, Babelfish, you're right and you're wrong. Yes, the majority of black people are dying at the hands of black people. According to the Department of Justice, out of 6.4 million violent victimizations from 2012 to 2013, in 62% of those cases, the race of the offender was black. Okay, so you want to talk about black on black violence? Well, in 62% of the cases, that's what you have. Interestingly, in the case of whites, in 56% of those cases of whites being victimized violently, the race of the offender was white. Okay, over half. And with Hispanics, the majority of those who victimize Hispanics are other Hispanics at 38.6%. So the moral of the story is that you are more likely to be attacked or victimized by people of your own race, and if you're a black person, the chances of that are greater than any other race. That's just statistical fact from the Department of Justice, which I'll go with. But, okay, no, your conclusion that police can't be expected to put themselves at risk of being prosecuted every time they have to deal with a violent offender is not actually accurate, and in fact is woefully off base. And let me tell you why. It's not actually, okay, if you start going and researching this stuff, it's not actually possible to say how many people police have killed over the past few years. There are not any verified, accurate counts, and that was quite surprising. It surprises a lot of people to find that out. Now, 2 media channels, The Guardian in Britain and The Washington Post, have been keeping track over the past 2 years of all police, anybody who dies, because of the police. And I presume that that's based mainly on media reports, because I don't think they have police officers or police forces reporting to them. I don't think that's a very likely case or scenario. The FBI database is the official government accounting, but not all police forces are obligated to report their figures to the FBI. And apparently there are some pretty big discrepancies between what the FBI says and what the Guardian and the Post are finding over the last 2 years. Okay, so we know. So basically, we know that we don't totally know, but we have some guesses. We have some estimations, not guesses. We have some estimations. What we know over the past 5 years is the figure is somewhere between 400 to about 990,000 people a year, okay, are killed by police. It's totally safe to say and assume that most of those deaths are justified. They're documented, they're reported on, many of them are on video. This is not, the police have body cams and whatnot. Every time a police officer kills somebody, it is at least investigated. So it's pretty safe to say that most of those deaths are justified. However, we know that not all of them were. Okay, I gave you 2 examples earlier. Since 2005, Bowling Green University's done a study, and they found only 54 criminal cases against police officers filed for police-involved shootings. Okay, 54. Okay, and that's since 2005. So that's the last 10 and a half years. 54 criminal cases brought against police officers. Not indicted, not convicted, just brought against them, okay? Here's what they say. In half the criminal cases identified by the Post and researchers at Bowling Green, prosecutors cited forensics and autopsy reports that showed this very thing. Unarmed suspects who had been shot in the back. It's half the cases. In a third of the cases, where officers faced charges, prosecutors introduced videos into evidence saying they showed the slain suspects had posed no threat at the moment they were killed. The videos were often shot from cameras mounted on the dashboards of patrol cars, standard equipment for most police departments. In nearly a quarter of the cases, an officer's colleagues turned on him, giving statements or testifying that the officer opened fire even though the suspect posed no danger at the time. And in 10 cases, or about a fifth of the time, prosecutors alleged that officers either planted or destroyed evidence in an attempt to exonerate themselves. A strong indication, prosecutors said, that the officers themselves recognized the shooting was unjustified. 54 cases of criminal prosecution out of something between 4 to 10,000 deaths over the last 10 and a half years. Okay? That's a 0.92% chance. It's not even a 1% chance. It's a 0.92% chance of just being prosecuted. And guess what? Out of those 54 cases, 21 of them were acquitted, and only 11 were convicted, and 19 are still pending. So, are police being over-prosecuted? Should police be in fear of going to jail for dealing with violent offenders? No, not even close. That's a completely unwarranted conclusion that police are running around in fear of doing their jobs. That conclusion has no basis in statistical fact at all. Okay, and so I'm basically writing it off. Now, I'm not even going to deal with Babel Fish's claim that white privilege does not exist. Now here's the thing about this. I'm bringing up another hot topic item, so hear me out. Hear me out on this. There are plenty of cases where people have used the term white privilege to divide, and there are many examples, and I think there are more examples where people are trying to simply point out that racial disparity exists. Okay, so here's the thing. I fully agree that the term white privilege is so overused, so baited, it's such a loaded term that it has totally lost any usefulness that it might have once had. Instead, I think it would be more effective if we put this under or describe this in a less loaded term. Okay? Let's call it racial disparity. And here's the thing. It exists for a lot more minorities than just blacks. It's amazing to me that there's no Latino lives matter. Because when you look at the statistics, there's a good case to be made. If the statistics show a good case to be made for black deaths, I'm really surprised that there's no case being made for Latino lives matter. I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that Latinos are immigrants and blacks aren't. And we just don't seem to like immigrants that much in this country. So I guess it would be a little hard to start a movement about Latino lives matter when immigrants don't matter. So here's the thing about racial disparity. Legally, you're right. Legally speaking, there is no racial disparity. We beat it. Okay, the civil rights movement did its job, and the laws were passed. The laws are on the books, and legally speaking, all people of whatever race, nationality, color have equal rights under the law. Okay, so can we say that that's true and still recognize socially that it takes a while for the culture to catch up? Proof? Well, look at how long it took for segregation to become desegregated when civil rights were passed. It was not an overnight thing. It took decades. There were schools in the South that were built to be separate but equal, and they stayed separate for years following the passing of the law, saying that there should be desegregation, that we should not be separating blacks and whites. Well, they stayed separated for a long time. Okay? So that is culture, that's society catching up. That's a generational thing as far as I can tell. Again, this is areas where I'm not an expert. So I'm just talking, of what I've seen. And what I've seen is that you can pass a law, but it takes a while. And if people are raised in a culture where racial disparity is the norm, where it's expected, where that's just the way of things, where that's what the Bible says to do, if they're raised that way, they don't care what the law says. They're going to integrate at the speed that their minds change, if they ever change, which is why it takes generations. It takes a new generation coming who wasn't raised in that culture, in that environment, with those values, to change a culture, to change a civilization. I really don't think I'm talking, that I'm babbling or talking Martian right now. This seems like pretty common sense stuff to me. So, socially, we aren't there yet. We aren't at a place of equal footing at all times for all minorities with white folks. And that's not a universal statement. We have a black president. We have black congressmen. We have black judges. We have black mayors. We have black CEOs. We have very, very successful black people in this country. So to say that there is no equality, to say that there is no movement, to say that that blacks have no sense of human rights or no dignity or no progress has been made, that's extremist nonsense. Of course there has been massive progress made. Massive progress. And that progress, unfortunately, is not as readily accepted or acknowledged as it should be. You want to talk about divisiveness? Well, that exists on both sides of the political camp. Okay, so socially, we're not there yet. And cases like Eric Gardner or John Crawford exacerbate that issue. They bring it to the forefront. They show that blacks are not always going to get a fair shake. Now, there are definitely going to be cases where you're going to find the same thing with whites. And you're going to talk about the justice system, and you're going to start talking about socioeconomic situations, right? Like the poor white in the South or in Detroit. They don't get a fair shake either. Okay, so is it only blacks who aren't getting a fair shake in the justice system? Of course not. Of course not. That's not, it's not all or nothing. It's a multi-layered, complex problem. So do I think there's a problem with racial disparity still in the United States as a social issue? Yeah, I do. Do I think this is the biggest problem in the United States? No, not even close.